Pam, tell me sort of like how you progressed, like coming more and more into your power with your 3 births. Because I know you have, because you've told me the stories before.
Yeah. Well, my first birth was in a birthing center, and it was a 51-hour labor. Took a long time. And reflecting back on that, one of the reasons it took such a long time is because I had done the Bradley method and I was completely in my head. I thought if I could figure out how to do birth, to do pregnancy and birth, then everything would go smoothly. So I had to stay in my linear mind. I thought I did. I stayed in my linear mind, and I was continually fighting with the midwives and second guessing them whether they had my best interest, and I'd have to try to figure things out. So Silas finally was born when I got to the place where I realized that I needed to die. My ego needed to die. I got to the place, I saw this cliff, and I realized in order for this baby to come through, I had to just jump. I had to give up all control. And pretty much as soon as I said yes to that, was at the place where I had no other choice. Then he was born. So
like ego meaning sort of our identity or mental identity of ourselves.
Yes, the identity of myself, and a lot of it was just control. I had to completely surrender and to the pain, to the contractions, to everything. So yeah, and to trying to figure it out and make sure that I was doing it right and everything was going right. So.
And with your second birth?
With my second birth, Ezra was a water birth, and I had already, there were a few years in between, so I had learned about the surrender part and knew that that was the only way that something new could be born, that was the pathway through death of myself. And so it was only a 12-hour labor, which was a lot better. And it was a water birth, but with that birth, I did birthing from within classes, and the birthing from within is beautiful, and I really appreciated it because it has more of a spiritual focus, and it's less heady. However, they gave us a long list. My midwife gave me a long list of about 20, 25 things that I needed. I needed my birth art, all this kind of birth art around. I needed candles with a particular scent that I could choose, but it was a particular scent, and CDs of whales groaning, and all different kinds of animal CDs, and the pool, and it was this long list of things. And what I did unconsciously was to give my power away to this list. I thought if I had all of these 25 things at my birth, as well as my husband was shifting from a Bradley coach to a birthing from within coach, and so it's much more spiritual and meditative, but I still had this idea that if he did this right, and if all these other things happened, and the warm water, that it would be a perfect, beautiful birth, and I wouldn't have pain and all that kind of stuff. So none of that was true. And I realized I had given my power away to all these things that sound nice. They are beautiful things, but it wasn't my path. So then it was my third birth before I met a midwife who had traveled around Central America from hut to hut helping women give birth. And the only thing that she required was 6 towels. So I decided to try a birth where I didn't have anything on the external. There was nothing different in my home, and all I had were the 6 towels for on the floor to kind of protect the carpet. And I didn't have anybody with me during the labor, so I was able to be 100% internal, and that is what it took me to come to the place of intuitively connecting with my baby. And having a birth much more like an animal does, with no preparation, no head knowledge. There just being no problem. It was just the process.
And which of those births did you enjoy the most?
Definitely the third one. Yeah, definitely. That was I would have kept doing them.
So your midwife was there, but she gave you a lot of, like, you had asked for a lot of just space.
Yeah. I actually, I asked her not to be there at all. Or I didn't want anybody there, but she came, and which was wonderful, and she was just in another room. Yeah. So.
And they came in, you said your husband came in and she came in, I guess the baby was coming out?
Yep, pretty much right at the end of the transition, she did walk in and she woke up my husband who was sleeping, and the two of them came in, just after Arlo had crowned.
Did that work for you?
Yeah, that worked for me, and it was important to my husband to be able to catch Arlo, and that was okay because I was leaning against the bed, and I wasn't able to, in the place where I could reach down and actually grab Arlo. So it was really nice, that kind of support. So
that physical sort of support. And you said you taught classes after? You taught classes for a while about women learning to really surrender and let the ego die. And
yeah, I think after my first birth, with that experience of surrendering and that the pathway to something new being born is always through death, I started to realize that birth is this huge metaphor in all the greatest literature. It's all about birth. And yet here are women having this birth experience, but without any of that spiritual context. It had become so co-opted by a patriarchy and by the hospital and by controlling things. And I thought, how can we use birth, death and birth, rebirth as this big metaphor, and then women have the most amazing opportunity to experience it in this incredibly intense, profound way, and yet nobody's preparing them in this way. So I started teaching a class called Spiritual Birthing, and it was also, the other motivation was I was feeling that Mother Earth was going through a transition. And my question was, who will be the midwives for what's happening in the earth right now and on the earth and with people globally, all the turmoil happening. And I
You're
thought,
talking about like all the changes and all these disasters and natural disasters
and just what's happening, among people too. And
the conflicts.
Yeah, the conflicts, right. And all the wars. And I thought, well, women, of course, would be the natural ones to midwife this the earth through this transition, but only if they can say yes to a natural spiritual birth, because then it's like it's such a gift to be able to experience this. So I started teaching these classes and talking more about the ego death and letting go of control, as opposed to the birthing classes that it was learn all this stuff and get control and make sure you have the right support systems. So it was great to finally, by my third birth, to have a midwife who just held the space that everything's okay. And the transition and the pain, the contractions mean that the baby's right around the corner. Something new is about to be born.
So, like, when it gets really intense, like, to you learn the way was to surrender into all of that.
To surrender and always have that sense of, like, this is perfect. It's unfolding perfectly. Yeah.
Beautiful. You were telling me about how when you look back at all 3 of your pregnancies and the births and the knowing your children and how different how different they are, how that affected your pregnancy and birth experience.
Yeah, I was really blessed to have an older, wise woman walk me through my last 2 pregnancies and to help me pay attention to my experience of the pregnancies and the births as not so much my experiences, but what this particular being inside of me was bringing. So I believe each of my children said yes to something very particular in to do in this world, or a way of being in this world. And now that they are 11, 13, and 16, I know them better, and a little bit about what their yes is, I can look back and say, oh yeah, that pregnancy was so different from the other ones, and here's how it was different, and the birth experience. So like I mentioned, my third birth was much more like an animal birth, and so that's my third child is much more like that. It resembles much more of a dog and can hold the sense of everything's okay, and has a contentedness about him that my first two didn't.
And a wildness, right?
And a wildness, yes, yeah, and an independence, yeah.
And your first child?
Yeah, well, one of the things my first child brought me was I had this expansive thought. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, I had this expansive thought. It was expansive for me because I was in a world of Western medicine and didn't have any knowledge of anything different in the natural world. I didn't know about natural remedies, and I couldn't even conceive of that. And I had this thought as soon as I found out I was pregnant that I could no longer take medication. There was something that felt incongruent with this pure little being inside of me and taking medication, using invasive procedures. And so that's when I started exploring things, natural birth, but also what to do if you don't take medication. I had no idea.
Like holistic medicine.
Yeah. So I learned about homeopathy and essential oils and herbs and and to the point where all three of my boys now have never been to a doctor, have never had Western medicine, and they've been really sick, but we've always found other ways to be able to deal with it.
You mean like acute illnesses?
They've had acute illnesses, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of unusual for boys that age, 11, 13, and 16, to have never even been to a doctor before. So, and but that was the message that I felt my oldest son Silas brought me.
And with your second child?
With my second child, my pregnancy the veil was very thin in my pregnancy with my second son, and I was taking on a lot of the pain of the world and some of the bigger world issues. And that turns out to be a lot of what his yes is. And he has a huge heart. He's filled with so much compassion, and is learning to navigate how to be able to help without depleting himself.
And you told me some story how you got really sick.
I was so sick. I was sick for 2 months. The 7th and 8th month, I was really sick, up until 8 months. And I had a cough, and I was coughing. My ribs were popping out. I was coughing so hard, and I was miserable, but also thinking about how can I give birth when all my ribs are out of place, and it was so painful. And then a healer saw that I had taken on a lot of pain from the tsunami in Indonesia that had taken place a couple months prior. And as soon as unconsciously, yes, I hadn't even watched any of I didn't want to see any of the scenes of it. I just was aware that it had happened. And when she was able to look and see that that's what was causing the illness, and that I had the power within me to say yes or no to whether I would take on this pain, that I would get better. And sure enough, I said, yes, I'll do this. I'll hold the pain of the mothers and the children who died in the tsunami or who had suffered tremendously. And within 24 hours, I was better. Mm-hmm. And so working with my second son his whole life, once he becomes conscious of the pain that he's taking on from other people, he immediately finds a place of power within himself. He's still able to help, but he doesn't help in a way that he's depleted. He helps from a powerful place.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So if you had to say something to pregnant women, what would you want them to know?
What would I want you to know? that the choices you make for prenatal care and for your birth should be what you feel comfortable with. And there's no shoulds out there. And find somebody who you trust and who you feel comfortable to hold the space so that you can completely surrender. But in doing that, be very conscious about be conscious about your choices and your fears, and face those fears, as opposed to just surrendering to other people's voices about, well, you better do this, you better do this. There's no rules. And I do feel like as a human species, we're evolving toward how animals give birth. And so that was always sort of my sight, and where's my edge, where's my fear to get to that place. And I would sit with that and then invite in a practitioner who would be able to hold the space for that. And don't give away your power. Your body was created to give birth, and find somebody who can hold the space if it's all okay.
And if, like, a lot of women are concerned about the pain, I know there's orgasmic birth and there's different opinions about all that, but what would you say to someone who's afraid of the pain?
The pain. Well, the pain, that it is possible to experience pain without suffering. And it is painful. And any of the little games that you might play in your birthing classes that are designed to lessen the pain are bullshit. And that if our goal is to lessen the pain, then you're on the wrong track. And I did so many of those games believing that if I did the right thing, my pain would be less. And it was just so much easier to face the pain, and I realized I could do that without suffering.
Can you explain the difference between pain and suffering?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess when I would experience the pain and just describe it to myself and let it be the pain, and it's somehow just looking straight into the face of it, I would suffer when I had commentary about it, and the commentary being, I can't handle this anymore. This is horrible. I might die. All those kind of things. This has to stop. All that kind of commentary caused a lot of suffering. But when I just was able to go internal and sit with the pain and realize that it was the surrendering to the pain. So it's like that thing that I'm sure, Benita, you tell people all the time about the waves. If you fight, you get lost in a really horrible wave, knocked over by a really big wave. The more you flounder and the more you try to get out of the situation, the worse it is, and the more you can get injured. But as soon as you surrender and just drop down and let the wave take you, then you still, in my experience, it was still as painful, but I didn't suffer around it, and I didn't resist it then. So it has to do with resistance, I think, too.
A lot of what I'm hearing you say is that surrender is a real key word.
Surrender, yeah.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah. Thank you,
Sharing
Benita.
your wisdom.
Thank you.